So this time we're going to look at a set of examples. There's going to be two examples in this third video slide. One about the oceans and one about fitness. All right, what are we going to be looking at with this infographic? Well, it looks like it's related to the ocean because of here's the boat and the ocean what's underneath the ocean surface, and you see all kinds of garbage that is collecting in our oceans. And what's being compared is the decomposition rate. How long they take to decompose. Now, what are some observations that you can make based on the graph? Well, I look at this and say, wow, there is quite a variety of different types of garbage. And this is not all the different types, but they have done a really good job of illustrating that there is an awful lot of different types of garbage. There is a lot of different types of garbage. And obviously this is just a sample, but it's meant to show that it's not just all fishing gear that ends up in the oceans. There's a lot more than that. Is there anything else that stands out on the graph? Well, I think that that the length of time that some of these take to decompose stands out to me. So 600 years for fishing line and 450 years for disposable diapers. That's an awfully long time. Even an aluminum can is 200 years. So we're talking about 3 or 4 times our lifespan. So I think what stands out on the graph is the length of time it takes for some very common things to decompose. What are the features of the graph that makes it effective? Well, I think the pictures help. The pictures make a difference. If you just had a list and a whole bunch of percentages next to it, it wouldn't have been quite as effective. And I think what else makes what makes it effective is the variety. They've chosen items that might surprise you, so like the diapers and the cigarette butts and the woolen socks. So there's a little bit of humor there. So I think that makes it effective and interesting to read. What are the features of the graph that are not effective? Well, I think one thing that is a little bit deceptive or not easy to read is that the size of the circle isn't clearly related with the length of time it takes to decompose. It does a little bit, like for example, this is 50 years and this is the same size, 50 years. But 50 years has the same circle size approximately as 10 to 20 years. So the circle size doesn't really relate to how long it takes to decompose. So the circle size is not closely related to the length of time it takes to decompose. Because if that was the case, for example, an apple core would nearly be a dot in this, just a small little dot in this picture. What prediction do you make for the future? Well, this is about the future because of the rates that they're talking about. 450, 400 years for decomposition of some of these things. So it means that we are going to have a lot of garbage in our oceans for a long time to come. Let's take a look at this infographic about the future, and it's your future workplace. And it was done by a survey of HR professionals. HR professionals stands for Human Resources Professionals, which are the people that hire for big companies. And what they predict is going to happen to the workplace in the future. So what's being compared are the working conditions now compared to the future. Now versus the future. Doesn't tell you how far ahead in the future. So I guess that's a little bit of a drawback to this infographic. What are some of the observations you can make based on the graph? Well, it looks like they predict there's only 3 major changes to working conditions. One based on that employers have to be more flexible. That employers have to offer treadmill desks. And that people are going to get paid for what they do instead of the hours they work. So that means that if you get paid by the job, not by how many hours you're clocking at work. So paid for output. Is there anything that stands out in the graph? Well, I think that what stands out is this big piece of pie here, 73%. And 73%, that means that, according to the graphic, that 73% are going to employers are going to have to be more flexible. That's a big percentage. Are going to need to be more flexible. And what are the features that make the graph effective? Well, I think these little icons here are helpful to describe what's being said in the words above. So I think the simple graphics of the stick figures makes the graphic easier to read. And what are the features of this graph that are not effective? Well, I think there's quite a bit wrong with this graphic. First of all, it looks like a pie chart, and a pie chart should represent 100%. And that's clearly not the case. This is more than 100%. And why is that chunk here, this bit, represents 73? So I think that it was the wrong type of chart to use for this infographic. They should not have used a chart that looks like a pie chart. If you think of a pie chart and what 73% looks like, here's the pie chart. This would be 50%. This would be 75%. So that's a very different look than that green portion right there. I also think that why did they choose those 3? Where did the other, that can't be the only things that are forecasted for change. So why, there's no mention about why these 3 have been chosen. And what prediction does it make for the future? Well, it's about the future, so I guess you can just read that information right off the graph. But in general, what for the future it looks like, if you are working at a desk, you might, and working for a big organization, you might have an opportunity to work in a place that has treadmill desks. But that's a fairly limited number of people that get to work in an office. There's lots of other different types of work, and this infographic doesn't really talk about that. It also, what else for the future? It means that employees will be paid out rather than on output rather than hours worked. So if you're a fast worker, it means you might have to work less hours and get the same amount of pay. If you're new at a job and it takes you a long time to finish something, it means that you're going to be paid less even though you're working a lot of hours. So if that really is the case, then there's going to be big differences in the hours worked compared to the pay. And lastly, of course, that employers have to be more flexible. So there might be more flexibility in what a job means. It doesn't mean that it might mean that you can work from home more often and that kind of thing. I think that's what they're implying. So lots about the future, but fairly vague about where the data comes from, why they didn't include a lot of the other things that we know are going to be changing in our workplace, and the graphic is not adequate as a pie chart.